he believed in that fusion of knowing your book work and knowing how to do it in the shop, kind of thing. There's China Sole, she's probably also gone, right? I took her, there's another language lesson. I took her Modern Woman's Novel class, which should have been called Modern Women of Lesbian of Color Novel class. Great class, really loved it. And she helped me start, she asked me to help her set up a Cuba Solidarity group on campus. She also got me into getting an account on a thing called the Fiber Optic Gateway, which I don't know if they still use the name FogNet. But there was this thing called email, and 1993 there weren't a lot of people using it. So my science background kind of had an influence in the humanities department. And China Sole asked me why someone with my practical skills would be willing to be one of the 2 male students in the 53-person class that was taking her, was basically a women's studies class. And I told her that those practical skills are really meaningless if you don't know why you're going to do what you're going to do with them. Philosophy is not some abstract thought. Deciding what we do and why we do it is extremely practical. Why matters as much as what. So, because liberal studies had a broad curriculum, I learned things like statistics, a bit of economics, some social science, and geology of flood levels, just among a few things. And I really wish I'd had that formal education when I was running a hydroelectric project in Nicaragua, because I had to deal with all those things and I didn't understand them at the time. Actually, I was in charge, which was even worse. Later, I went on to work on a different type of hydro project, drinking water hydro projects in Oaxaca, Mexico. And that theory side of the liberal studies education really helped me there. So let me tell you another story about theory and practice. One day, I was in the student union, and I was making my photocopies, and a couple of students and a teacher at the other end of the table, and they started talking about countries that had the right to bear arms, countries that had armed their people. And they actually mentioned Nicaragua. And I'm sitting there at the other end of the table, you know, my ears just light, and they're talking about Nicaragua's right to bear arms, and what they were talking about is political science. For me, I was issued a Kalashnikov machine gun, 200 bullets, 3 hand grenades, 3 clips, and I was considered allowed to participate in my individual defense, is how they referred to that, which is Spanish for I've been inducted, right? So there we were, and they were talking the theory, and I had the practice. And the strangest thought came through my mind. I'm sitting there listening to them talk, already thinking, if I say anything, they're going to think I'm weird. They're going to have me in front of their class, or both. So I decided to say nothing. But the words in my mind were, you know, they're all talking about handing rifles to the people, and I was thinking, you got to have surface-to-air missiles. I mean, you know. And the difference was I had done it, right? Again, theory and practice. You got to have the two, right? I tried to get out of there without marking myself as totally weird, and probably should have spoken more about some of the things I was witness to. But you try to live. So, how many of us are going to be teachers? Good number. How many of you out there are teachers? Well, we got a fight on our hands. You got a fight on your hands. You actually have 2 fights on your hand. One is for that liberal studies, broad culture, theory, practice, science, and humanities approach. That approach is going to get a lot of lip service and some worksheets. But that approach is really not all that accepted. There is a conservativeness inside academia that retains. Right? There's also a bias towards the middle class and away from the working class. I'll tell you a story I've told, inflicted on a lot of people, but you guys knew. My older son, when he was in the 5th grade, was given the simple word problem. You have a 12-foot board. How many 3-foot boards can you cut from it? He said 3. Now, how many think he was wrong? Be careful. Okay, it's okay to think he was wrong. All right, some people would say 4. That's what his teacher said. His teacher said, oh, little boy, 12 divided by 3 is 4. But the little boy had spent time working in the shop with his dad, and he knew that you had that 3 feet, and then you had the width of a saw blade. Then you had 3 more feet, and you had another width of the saw blade. By the time you got to that 4th piece, it was 3 saw blade widths shorter than 3 feet. Thank you, right? And the sad part of this story is that teacher continued to consider him wrong. She told him that he had that question wrong. And he, after that, was afraid to say such things to that teacher, and got the lesson that those types of comments were not welcome in the 5th grade, right? I wish that tunnel vision was limited to middle class people not really having a sensitivity for working class people, but it goes the other way too. There's a lot of research in foreign language education and other things that is not being paid attention to. In East Palo Alto, I don't know if anybody knows about the East Palo Alto school system's math and science curriculum request for proposals. They put out a request for proposals, and some people who work across the freeway in this place called Stanford, you've heard of Stanford, right? They answered that request for proposal, and they wanted to use applied math. All the research shows that applied math is retained better than abstract math. Anybody who ever worked in a wood shop can also tell you that too, right? But there is research done in how to teach math and science, blending the two and teaching the math in a way you're going to retain it and empowering you to do that science better. They were rejected, and they had to fight for years. They had to sue the school district just to be able to file that request. Another thing happens in foreign language education, which is dear to my heart. I'm sure most of you, most of us, we suffer through foreign language education. It looks like a reverse sentence diagram. Like it's like you take out your Lego bricks and you're going to assemble sentences. Well, we're talking about the languages of peoples. Right? We're not talking about something that's abstract or something that's not cultural. And we're certainly we should not be using analytical grammar as a prescription, like an erector set. This is how you build a language. The first thing you have to do to learn a language is to understand the people who speak it. Otherwise, you have no need for that language. Now, I would just like to make sure that everybody think about that there's a cultural aspect to language just as sure as there is an actual numeric value of the width of a saw blade. But the other fight's the one that's going to be a lot harder. And that's because there's a war on against public education. This war is called privatization. And I know that a lot of you are going to have to go out there and, try to find a job. Choices are somewhat limited. So please don't feel what I'm going to say is judgmental about the choices you're going to have to make. Right? There are compromises in this life. But our public schools are very popular.
Thanks, though.
Truth of it is, the affluent in our country have figured out ways for them not to pay taxes. And they have stopped paying taxes. The revenues for our public schools have gone down, and the support for our public schools has gone down. Our trade schools have been ruined, and basically the working class communities are neglected. Right down to 101 here in Silicon Valley, we have lobbyists that work for corporations that do everything they can to lower their taxes and to avoid responsibility. They also have other lobbyists that do everything they can to make it inexpensive for them to import people from other countries to do the jobs that they no longer train or never trained people here to do. And I think they're doing it mostly just out of money. The Valley is typical. It's local, but it's typical of what's going on across the whole country. I don't know if you noticed, but I said I would have been teaching. When I graduated from San Francisco State in 1994, trying to go into the junior college system here in California or into any public school system and trying to teach shop and try to do for this country, the country I was born in, what I did for people in Nicaragua was nearly impossible. The school systems were collapsing. They have definitely closed out the industrial arts departments. And then I wasn't willing to go through the hoops. In San Francisco State itself, they were doing measures to keep it from giving people full-time benefits. I had one Chinese class that would stop halfway through the class and change teachers so that they didn't give that teacher more than 14 hours a week in order not to have to pay her benefits. So, you know, I considered myself young. I was a younger man then and had children, and frankly, it was just not economically feasible for me to go through the kind of sacrifice that would have been necessary to actually get into teaching. So, I wasn't willing to starve for 20 years. What's happened? Well, what I've done is I've volunteered in schools. I have 2 sons, and I've been volunteering in schools for most of those 20 years. Those schools are underfunded in every way. Teachers' pay has gone down. Teacher support has gone down. And most teachers, and I hate to tell you this, but most of you are going to end up working hours you don't get paid for. You're also going to get pressured to take jobs where you're not going to have union representation. Private sector, as if they hadn't done enough damage already, they now have a thing that they call the Common Core. They call this education reform. Now, by education reform, they mean making education look more like a business. Now, I want to think about that. Do you want education to look like a business? Do you want a certain percentage of them to fail? Because that's how business works. I own a business. Businesses fail. Do we do this at the post office? Oh, we're going to have 35 post branches and we expect 15 of them to fail. Do we do this with the metro? Imagine if we said a certain number of BART stations are supposed to fail. Well, we can't have a system design that has a certain number of schools have to fail. But that's the system that's being imposed. And this automated, computer-driven Common Core, which is really stripping down those central pieces, is not giving our kids a well-rounded education. It's putting a lot of teachers in the position of having to run a testing mill, basically. So, graduate students, how many graduate students are around here? How many people had to go dig up funding for their research, right? How many teachers are actually out there trying to just get funding so they can go for a field trip? Sort of like we're begging for things one subject at a time. If you teach a grade level, you'll run into almost all of this. And I'm not saying don't do it, but be aware. In the Oakland Unified School District, where I know a lot, and also in the Berkeley Unified School District, where I volunteered for 10 years, things like art, sports, music, Spanish, these things are considered elective. Not elective to the student, elective to the school as to whether or not they do them or not. And that shouldn't be. And a lot of times they're under a lot of pressure to say, oh, we'll do one this year, we'll do one the next year, as if that's all you needed was one semester of Spanish, one semester of computers, maybe art, and they're all the same thing, right? Because they're not Common Core. And the only thing that really matters is what's on the California state test. Because the schools are all being pressured to go for the test, right? You'll find that this attack on our schools definitely does not include teaching civics. Civics is almost disappeared from our school systems, all the way across. And I can see why. This attack on our schools, or this privatization of our schools, being led up by people who are like our Secretary of Education. People have heard of the Secretary of Education. She is part of a movement that really wants to have vouchers and privatize the schools even further, where you'll be able to take your voucher, and she's part of a religious movement, so they want to be able to use public funds to back their religious schools. That said, many of you, will find that the charter schools are the best places to work, right? In reality, right? You might find that the charter schools offer most of the work, and you might find that they offer the most creativity. It's ironic, right? But the situation didn't happen for no reason. Right?
Good job.
But I'll tell you what you won't find is you won't find a lot of older people on staff. You'll find a lot of very amateur management, and you'll find an attitude that is anti-union, extremely anti-union. Now, my son goes to a charter school. I'm not saying to be a fanatic about this, but let's get real. The California law on charter schools is basically letting people run schools with public money. Right? Now, my son's school promises hands-on learning. That's not what really happened. What really happened is, once again, they focused on the California state test, and they spent a lot of time raising money. It's in an affluent area. They raise a lot of money, and they take a lot of good pictures, right? But the hands-on learning didn't happen. So what do I suggest? Well, it wouldn't be me if I didn't say, you know, you got to get political about this. There were local elections in 2016. There were elections for school board. There were elections for city councils. These elections also matter. And any idea that not registering and not voting and not participating makes the situation better, I would argue very strongly against that. And we got to pay attention. In Oakland, we had a group led up by Eli Broad's foundation spent $1 million